It's always a great day for me when I'm at Salesforce. I am a coach to Salesforce, so I'm a contractor, not an employee like most of you, but I'm a contractor to Salesforce. I've also been a customer of Salesforce, which is great, but I have to say, nothing quite equals being on the 61st floor today. It was great to be up there. You kind of feel like, it also gives you that position of altitude, I think, where you can look out at the world and things appear and feel just a little different, right, than when we're on the ground level. So I really appreciated being up there, and I can't wait to go back up there as well. So today, I really wanted to talk to you on a personal level, because all of us in this room are really dedicated, all of you are dedicated, as I am, to bringing an end to the paucity of true articulation and communication that we have today. The world is drowning in valueless words. Just take this image as an example. So we're out in the ocean and we are weighed down and we're drowning in billions of words that are meaningless. They're shallow, they're callow, they don't have the kind of bearing that true oratory really has. And yet we're looking for and we're trying to grab at an anchor that can only be supplied by the inspiration that comes from true oratory. This is what we really need to restore, and this is communication. And remember, 64% of all communication is from my heart to your heart. One of the things I often told Nancy Reagan was, because she had a hard time giving speeches in the public, we typed up, they were large, be like 7x8 index cards, and she'd have them typed in blue ink on her cards, and that's how she gave a speech. She was never comfortable with it, even though she had been a film actress. But I used this quote with her: whenever the heart speaks, no matter how simple the words, they're always acceptable to people who have hearts. So 64% of all of your communication is nonverbal. When you walk in the room, someone has already taken a position on whether they're going to like you or not, whether they're going to listen to you or not, and whether they're going to find any value in what you had to say. So that's why, for example, the story that Adrian told about the tie, it's sort of a story it's a two-edged sword, right? Because, and Adrian told it correctly, that when Reagan rejected my advice to look younger and to wear his shirt collar a little higher, which, by the way, is a good tool, he rejected it because it wasn't authentic to who he really was. And so we'll get into this a little bit more. I have so much I want to share to you, and I want to cram it in to the limited time that we have, and also be able to answer your questions. So there was another thing that Adrian brought up. There was the tie story, and what was the other one you told?
Christian hymns.
The hymns. Before we go too far away from this, I want to tell you so many stories I'd love to share with you. But when Nancy Reagan was dying, the last few months of her life, I spent a lot of time with her at her house in LA. And so I read her portions of my book, and I read her that story. And she said, oh, I don't remember Ronnie saying his favorite hymns to you. And I said, yes. And I said, it's important for people to know that, because this book is about understanding Reagan's character from the inside out. It's like no other book you will ever read about Reagan. You'll read about the facts of his life and his biography, but you won't understand what made him important. And this is why history needs to be seen from this vantage point. History is not just a recitation of facts. History, because it's so important for us to know, Churchill said, the farther we can look back, the further we can go forward. Well, what is it that we need to know about history? Is it just that this battle occurred on this day? No, we need to understand why that battle happened. What was the motivating force behind it? And these are the things that will help us go further into the future. So Nancy Reagan says to me, well, what were those hymns? And I was really perturbed, because I thought they were vastly different characters. They had a different upbringing, And I was really frankly irritated that she asked me, well, what were his favorite hymns, because I thought she should know them. And so I started singing for her the president's favorite hymn. And so I started, and he'll walk with me, and he'll talk with me. And she then started singing with me. And we were holding hands, you know, like a person who's nearing death, very tight grip. And I thought, how interesting. Here's a person who knew this in her heart, but she didn't know enough about her heart to know it. These are all key factors in helping to save humanity from being drowned in a sea of worthless words. The other picture I have about the worthlessness of words is a desert. So you go to a desert, there are billions of grains of sand, but there's no fruit in a desert. So there are billions of words being exchanged every day on social media and face-to-face, but what is the fruit of those words? What is the meaning behind them? What is the movement behind them? What's the energy behind them? And what's the impact behind them? These are all things I think today, I'm not so interested in learning how to speak, but I'm interested in learning the impact of words. And I think that's why I'm so happy to be here with you today, because you're devoted to finding these skills and finding the importance of them and employing them in your life. So today, I'm going to go as fast as I can through this, but I'm going to talk about the anatomy of a great speech, the way Reagan did it. And I'm going to give you the keys to developing and understanding the anatomy of a great speech. Now, I'm going to begin by telling you how I ended up in the White House and learning these things from Ronald Reagan. On July 5th, a hot summer afternoon, I was sitting at the desk at my second job. I was working for the family office of the founder of General Motors. And I heard machine gun fire coming through the glass entrance door of our office suite. I think I'm sure there were people screaming. I don't know if I was screaming, but I dove under my desk and grabbed my phone. I didn't know whether I was going to be alive the next minute or not. Soon after that, I saw that we were being taken hostage by 6 ski mask gunmen who were actually not trying to get anything from us, the staff, but they were trying to win money from taking the founder of General Motors into captivity, and to win a financial prize for that. So about 5 hours later, when the SWAT team had come in and successfully negotiated with these terrorists, we were led down the fire escape of the building, and that was brought to an end. But it was a dramatic experience and emotional experience for me as well, especially when 3 weeks later, this gentleman who was the target of these terrorists said to me, I would like you to start, and I was 20 years old, I would like you to start the first strategic planning initiative for the trustees of our foundation and our family office. I want to find out if we're having any impact from our investments and from the grants that our foundation is making. So because of that day and that incident, I learned the value of measuring impact on our actions and on our words. And as a result of that, 11 years later, I was sitting in the back seat of a presidential limousine with Ronald Reagan. That was the day that he unfolded to me and gave me the ability to discern his character. So we were going off to give a speech. The president was giving a keynote address in Washington, and we walked out of the Oval Office together. And I have to say that Ronald Reagan, he was 3 inches taller than I, and he strode into a room or anywhere he was going because he was a bit taller, and he walked as if he always was wearing cowboy boots. So if you can imagine this stride, and I was like racing to keep up with him. And when we got to the motorcade, and a motorcade is always made up of 28 cars. There's a decoy, I'm sure you've seen this before. So there are 2 limousines. A friend of mine who also worked for the president, he would be the guy who sat in the decoy. And he said, you have no idea what it's like going through a motorcade where there are thousands of people on either side, and they're cheering and they're applauding you, and they don't know which limousine to look into. So he said when he was often in the lead limousine, he would wear his Ronald Reagan mask. And he would peer out the door, and they would be applauding that mask. And then the next the real Ronald Reagan would come. So it was meant as a joke, but it was a very funny kind of experience to have. So anyway, I was sitting in the real limousine, but when we got to the car, I'd been in the motorcade many times, which includes, by the way, the media, cars for the media, the staff, Secret Service, the local police, and then there's the Death Watch car. You know what the Death Watch car is? There's always a Death Watch car in a presidential motorcade in case something happens. Okay, and of course, something did happen in the case of Reagan. He was shot, and that death car always stays and records with personnel from WACA, which is called the White House Communications Agency. You know, the White House, wherever you go, sets up its own network. So it's entirely controlled, security-wise, by the White House and by the federal government. So we approached the limousine, and I think to myself, the Secret Service never told me what side of the car I get in on. And I imagined if I followed Reagan, and by the way, the principal always sits behind the Secret Service agent that doesn't have his hands on the wheel. Probably, you all probably have figured that out, right? But I hadn't. So Reagan gets in, and I thought, oh my gosh, do I step over him? What if I fall on his lap? I mean, you know, it could be an embarrassing moment. So he gets in on that side, and both doors are being held open by Secret Service agents. So I just decided, okay, it must be right to go around the other side of the car and get in and sit there. So there was a delay in the motorcade that day. And because there was a delay, I thought I better tell the president, well, you know, brief him on what we were going to be doing, all the details. He said, I know, Jim, I know exactly what we're going to be doing. Let me tell you about my upbringing. Let me tell you, and basically he opened up this book of his life, the story of his life told to me through the values, the conviction, and the belief system that he developed over all those years. So he was basically saying, this is who I really am, but this is not who I present myself to the media as. Now, it's not that he was putting on some sort of false identity. It was because he had to talk in the way that the media would understand him, which is basically they expected political pronouncements. So as he began to tell me about his upbringing and what was important to him, I began for the first time, this is several months after I started working for him, to understand what really motivated him. And that was the, I guess you'd say, the compass through which I was able to discern what was really going on in Reagan's heart and mind. And because of that, I began to watch for other things that were indicators to me. And one of them was when we were talking about this before we started here, the first bilateral meeting between Gorbachev and Reagan, which is held in Geneva. And just before the Gorbachevs came for the first meeting, for the first dinner, I said to the president, I was sitting in front of a roaring fire with him, this massive fireplace, just the two of us, and I said, what do you think will really bring down these totalitarian regimes so that people can be free? And he said, even though we were pursuing diplomatic, political, and economic initiatives, he said, oh, there's only one way, and that is through the people's own desire to be free, the people's own desire to know God. And of course, his history shows that the end of those regimes began in Eastern Europe, in the churches in Eastern Europe. So history has vindicated Reagan's position in that. I did not go out and tell the press corps that that was Reagan's view, because of course they wouldn't have understood that, and that would have upset everything. There were a lot of other stories associated with that first bilateral meeting that I'd love to share with you, but I need to move back to what I said I was going to focus on today, which is really the anatomy of the speech, according to the way Reagan did it. Reagan, having been known as the great communicator, I think it's useful to take a page or several from his example. So, this idea of being able to understand the anatomy of a speech, I think is critical. In every speech that Reagan gave, there's an architecture to it. And this, I think, is genius. And you might want to take this down and create this as an architecture for yourself. There are three fundamental aspects to an effective speech. The first one is to state the facts, which today we would call content. Now, this is after you've made your wonderful, warm introduction, and you've made basically, remember, one of the most important things you can do is to build a bridge to your audience. Otherwise, the words that follow will not cross that bridge. So there's some way that you have to put yourself in a position to build a bridge to the audience where they're going to trust you, so that when you deliver your message, they're going to hear it, they're going to find it purposeful, and they're going to use it. So the first thing, of course, is to build a bridge. Those are the techniques. What I'm talking to you about now are both the strategic elements of a great speech and what I call the architecture of a great speech. So the first is content, and being able to state, for example, in the case of Reagan, and using, well, I'll say this in just a second, but in the case of Reagan, he had a platform that he repeated the elements of over and over and over again. And he was very criticized by the media because they said, why do you keep telling us that you want to remove restrictive regulations on the American people? Why do you keep telling us that you want tax relief? Why do you keep telling us that you're an evangelist for freedom? He would say those things over and over and over again. But that was his content. That was the way he was evangelizing his political platform. And I always think, and a lot of people didn't realize this, but Reagan, after he graduated from Eureka College in Illinois, very old college, I spoke there. I gave the Fall of the Wall address last year. So I stood where Reagan said he realized the power of his oratory when he got all the student body together in the student union to overthrow the president of the college, which I think is an interesting start to his oratorical career. But he said that's where he learned the power to motivate people. But I think you find this ability to state your content and to repeat it is an effective way to do this. So then the second is to ask a question. And the question then goes to the heart of what you want to convey, but in a way that the audience accepts it as their question. So it's always a rhetorical question. And then the third part of this architecture of the great speech is a call to action. So you have three components: state the content or the facts, ask a question, and give a call to action. Now, I'm going to give 6 very quick examples of how Reagan did this in 6 very notable speeches. And I know I'm getting a green sign, so I have a limited amount of time. But is it okay if I keep going? I might get in our territory for a Q&A, but I think this is really important. Is that okay with everyone?
Yes.
Yes. So the first speech was given in the Hall of Westminster that I want to refer to in London, and I was seated on these in chairs right beside the podium, and I thought, well, it's really like I'm sitting in church because Reagan is such an evangelist for what he believes in. And you know, these are kind of high-minded ideas. I mean, this is the President of the United States speaking, and you're sitting there and you're thinking to yourself, well, that's all well and good for the President of the United States, but what about me? All of these things pertain to telephone calls. They pertain to conversations with your families. It pertains to any way that you're using words, that you're molding them, modifying them, and feeling them. These are all things that Reagan represented. It was just that he was doing it at a kind of, as I said, if he had gone to, after he graduated from Eureka, he considered going on to Yale Divinity School and becoming a preacher. Well, if he had done that, he would have been a minister to maybe thousands. In this case, he was an evangelist to millions of people. So millions of people got to hear his message instead of just a number of people in a church. So here he says, and this is, you have to remember about Reagan's foreign policy. He gave two great bookend speeches in Westminster in London. He gave one in 1982, which set out his foreign policy goals, and then in 1986, he went back and he said, this is, in 1987, what we've accomplished and what is still left to be done. So he says, if history teaches anything, it teaches self-delusion in the face of unpleasant facts is folly. We see around us today the marks of our terrible dilemma. And these are the facts, right? You following this? Predictions of doomsday, anti-nuclear demonstrations, an arms race in which the West must, for its own protection, be an unwilling participant, and so forth. And then he says, but here comes the question. What is our course? Must civilization perish in a hail of fiery atoms? Must freedom wither in a quiet, deadening accommodation with totalitarian evil? Those are the questions that were designed to pique the hearts and minds of everyone who is listening. So, and again, he states the facts, and then he asks the question. That is to take us further. Again, when he's speaking at Bergen-Belsen camp, where the Jews were taken and were murdered, he says, everywhere we go, and I was with him that day, are memories pulling us, touching us, making us understand that they can never be erased. Such memories take us where God intended his children to go, toward learning, toward healing, and above all, toward redemption. They beckon us through the endless stretches of our heart to the knowing commitment that the life of each individual is important and that we can change the world because of it. But then he says, then he adds, hope leads us, if we're prepared to trust us, toward what our President Lincoln called the better angels of our nature. Now, this is another important feature of your section, of your architecture, of stating the fact, is to use wiser pilgrims than yourself. The most important thing you can do, because you're going to stand here and people are going to say, well, how does he know? Or how does she know? Or, she's not old enough to understand that. Why is she telling this? Well, here's Reagan, the oldest man to take the U.S. presidency, and in 96% of all of his speeches, he's quoting from what you would call generally accepted wiser thinkers, people, and leaders. So he loves to quote from Lincoln. So he says, and this is what Lincoln called our better angels of our nature. And then, rising above all this cruelty, out of this tragic and nightmarish time, again, at Bergen-Belsen camp, beyond the anguish, the pain and suffering for all time, we can and must pledge never again. So there's Ronald Reagan giving you an exhortation. Okay, the third one is Reagan loved to talk about destiny. Here he says, here then is our formula for completing our crusade for freedom. Here is the strength of our civilization and our belief in the rights of humanity. Our faith is in a higher law. Yes, we believe in prayer and its power. And like the founding fathers of both of our lands, this is in England, we hold that humanity was meant to not be dishonored by the all-powerful state, but to live in the image and likeness of him who made us. And again, he quotes from Lincoln, but most importantly, he ends it by saying, and this is one of his favorite quotes, again to inspire the audience, let us seek to do his will in all things, to stand for freedom, to speak for humanity. Come, my friends, as it was said of old by Tennyson, it is not too late to seek a newer world. And just two more. I think it's important to say that in the case of the Berlin Wall, that, as you know, the Berlin Wall was, the speech was almost not, what really wasn't going to be the six most important words in the 20th century. because everyone wanted to take out these words. But he says, we welcome change and openness, for we believe that freedom and security go together, and so forth. There's one sign the Soviets can make, and that would be unmistakable, and that would advance dramatically the cause of freedom and peace. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, open this gate. So he calls on that point where he's asking the question and then he makes a demand. He's saying that, and he knew by this time that Gorbachev could do it. So don't ever ask anyone in a speech to do something that you know they can't do, right? So if you know that they can't create a new software program or they don't have these skills or that skills, don't ask them to do it. But if you know they have it, call on them to do it. Ask them to do it. Tell them that you need it. And the last two, I just have to share these because they're so important to me. We went to Normandy to celebrate the 40th anniversary of D-Day, and we took some of the last living survivors from that, and they were called the Boys of Pointe-à-Hoc. And so Reagan is in this magnificent setting, and he's looking over at these gentlemen, and he says, 40 summers have passed since the battle you fought here. You were young the day you took these cliffs. Some of you were hardly more than boys and with the deepest joys of life before you. Yet, you risked everything here. Here comes the question. So that was a fact, right? Here comes the question. Why? Why did you do it? What impelled you to put aside the instinct for self-preservation and risk your lives to take these cliffs? We look at you and somehow we know the answer. It was faith and belief. It was loyalty, and it was love. And now the last, which was his last peroration from the Oval Office, and it's a personal reflection about something that was very important to him. And this is what he said: the last few days when I've been at that window upstairs, that was in the family quarters, I thought a bit about the shining city on a hill. The phrase comes from John Winthrop, who wrote it to describe the America he imagined. What he imagined was important because he was an early pilgrim, an early freedom man. Reagan loved that term, freedom man, and he used it a lot. He journeyed here on what today we call a little wooden boat, like other pilgrims, and he was looking for a home that would be free. And then he closes by saying, I've spoken of the shining city all my political life, but I don't know if I ever quite communicated what I saw when I said it. This is pure, perfect Ronald Reagan, if you get this. He's now communicating what he saw. What does that mean? When he said it. That is, he perceived when he said it. This is what he was thinking. Again, that goes back to how we started today, that 64% of all communication is nonverbal. So then he explains it. But in my mind, it was a tall and proud city built on rocks stronger than oceans, windswept, God-blessed, and teeming with people of all kinds, living in harmony and peace. A city with free ports that hummed with commerce and creativity. And if there had to be city walls, the walls had doors, and doors that were open to anyone with the will and heart to get here. And then he ends. That's how I saw it, and that's how I see it still. And that was his goodbye speech from the Oval Office. And I'll just end, before we go to Q&A, by saying that Reagan also, and we can do this in a certain scale in everything that we speak. Remember, people want to hear that they're good, and people want to hear that there's a way out. And they want to hear that America's best days are still ahead. They want to hear that your best days, if you're having a personal conversation with someone, they don't want to hear the bad things. They want to hear the good things. And I'm not saying that you have to make up something, but I'm saying to find a way to communicate to people that gives them hope. And this is what Reagan always did. He loved to say that we have a destiny, not to the left or to the right, but to the up or to the down. And he left people almost in every speech with the last thing I'm going to say before we go to Q&A, and that is the quote from the American patriot Thomas Paine, who said, "We have it within ourselves to begin the world over again." We have it within ourselves to begin the world over again. Reagan felt that that was the most empowering gift that he could give to an audience. To then, by ending every speech, to shift the power from the podium to the audience. That is the basic framework of a great speech. Thank you, and we'll go to Q&A now.